Nauvoo, South Jersey is pleased and honored to welcome our Diversity Advocate of the Year, Subha Barry. Welcome, Subha.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
It's our honor to be sharing with you. You have a wealth of information about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. Tell us a little bit about your background, please.
Well, I actually came to this country as a student from India and chose to build a career in financial services for about the first 25 years or so. And along the way, really began to look at some of the challenges with inequities, especially in the workplace, and began to focus my attention on doing business with diverse communities, and then beginning to recognize that the pathways to talent can be unequal. And in doing so, devoted actually the second half of my career to building inclusive workplaces for all.
Many businesses are trying to expand on the diversity initiatives. What is the first recommendation that you have for a business owner to make a more inclusive workplace environment?
Very often people think that diversity and inclusion is just something that large companies should take on and tackle in scale. I actually think small businesses is where you can incubate this, because small businesses are local. So look at the community around you. And depending upon the diversity you have in your community, well, not every community may have a preponderance of African Americans or Hispanics. And in the cases where they do, make sure that your workplace is reflective of those communities in which you do business and who you serve. But every community has gender diversity. So make sure that your employee population is reflective of that gender diversity. About 8% of the global population is part of the LGBTQ community. Make sure that you have some consciousness around that as you recruit people on board. Think about people with disabilities. So diversity actually takes on so many different forms. Just make sure that as you're building your business, you have your radar out for members from all those communities to find a way to incorporate them, bring them in, and create inclusion for them, but also simultaneously signaling externally that you are a business that understands them and understands their needs.
That's a very enlightening observation and an easy solve to somebody who's trying to make diversity work in their business place. What do you see as the most significant challenge for women in business today?
Well, I have to tell you that there are some systemic issues that individual women can no longer just solve on their own, and small businesses can't solve on their own. Let's just take childcare, for example. It is so unequal in terms of what is available to whether it's women with means or those with benefits from the workplace that affords and allows them to be able to have secure childcare, especially in those early years. And small businesses cannot create those for each of their employees. So it is the government's job to some extent to step up to make sure that there is an equalizing mechanism, whether it's in grants, whether it's in tax credits, whether it is in, discounted, affordable childcare that is made available to all families where men and women want to come work. So I would say to you that the lack of systemic structures that afford the ability for women through their life cycle, when they're young, they have certain needs. As they become parents, those needs change. And as women get a little older, they become, pulled in two directions, taking care of the elderly, and that too disproportionately, unfortunately, just like childcare, tends to fall on the women. So the ability for there to be government structures that allow those things to be supported will enable women to actually focus on their careers and their work lives.
Wow, that's an interesting comment on that subject, and that's so true. Women have a hard time when they want to have a family. They want to have everything. and it's hard for the fathers too. So the system needs to change. So that's
It surely does. And you know, something we noticed early in the pandemic with both moms and dads at home, we figured that there would be a much more even playing field. And it was. The first 3-4 months of the pandemic in parent families, you found that, and whether it's same-sex families or otherwise, what you found was that everybody rolled up their sleeves and chipped in. But that changed 6 months out, a year out, disproportionately. Women carried 80% of the burden as compared to men. And we have data and statistics that showed that. So all those traditional norms of who does what came back into play. And that has derailed how women have dealt with this pandemic. What was the number in January? Something like 72 times the number of men as compared to women came back to the workforce. Men are back at pre-pandemic levels for employment. Women are still lagging. They have still not come back to work full time.
what a setback for women's equality.
Yes, and you know, once we fall behind, it takes so much longer to catch up. So we have to make sure we don't fall behind.
So what business values or ethics are really important to you in your leadership role?
Well, I think about, everybody talks about integrity, but I want to talk about, and work ethic. You want people who really believe in working hard. But I'm going to actually insert two that are not as common. People don't think of them as quote unquote leadership competencies. One is empathy, and the other one is vulnerability. So when you talk of a powerful leader, you're not going to think of the words empathy and vulnerability, and yet that's exactly what is needed in order to create inclusive work environments. Empathy is somebody who, even though they may never have been in your circumstance, has the ability to walk by your side and relate to what you're going through and feel the passion, kindness, and supportiveness towards what you need. And I think empathy is important. Vulnerability is actually being able to speak about your own shortcomings, your own weaknesses, your own failures. And when leaders are able to do that, all of a sudden the gap between them and their employee population narrows, and people feel connected. And the ability for a leader to become vulnerable essentially says to them, hey, I'm not expecting you to be perfect, but I'm expecting us to be able to work together to aim for a common purpose and a goal.
When are you running for public office? That's what I want to know.
Oh, aren't you kind to say that? I don't think I would last
We need
very
leaders
long.
in public office like you. But what a powerful commentary on that question. Thank you. Is your teenage self happy with your adult self?
Actually, my teenage self is very proud of my adult self, because my teenage self, while growing up in India, believe it or not, used to say, I want to be a CEO in a company in the United States. And I don't know where I got it from, but that was my goal and ambition. So, fast forward all these years, I may not be the CEO of a large Fortune 500 corporation, but I am really proud of being the CEO of an organization that is changing the world around us.
Glass half full or half empty?
Always half full. In fact, it's always 3/4 full, even if it is half full.
What advice would you give a young entrepreneur just starting out today?
I would tell them to have a combination of a sense of fairness and focusing really on doing the right thing. I would ask them to tie back what it is that they are doing to something that benefits, has a greater good connected to it. And I would ask them to have the courage to fail.
Who is your celebrity crush? Do you have one?
Oh, I do have one. It's Tina Turner.
Why?
I love her moves. And then I found out that, do you know that she taught Mick Jagger all his moves?
I could believe that now, but I never thought about it.
Think about how he moves.
Oh
Think
my
about
gosh,
how he
I never
struts.
thought about that.
And so she is I know that she went through some, horrific, relationships, but I think of her as being enormously resilient. I think of her as having incredible passion. I'd love to be able to have dinner with her sometime, and thank God my crush is still alive. But I know that lots of people want to have dinner with Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King. I'd settle for Tina Turner.
That was my last question. Who would you like to have dinner with? So Mahatma Gandhi would be one of mine too, although George Clooney kind of tops him. I can't help it.
Oh, and he's around. He may just listen to us and say, why not? Let me go have dinner with you guys.
Well, Subha, thank you so much for joining us today. We really had a great time speaking with you. You gave us a lot of food for thought. And
I wish you the very best. I am so honored that NAUBO of South Jersey chose me as their honoree this year. I am deeply grateful for it, and I hope that we continue this work together. There's a lot to be done. My big fear is that as the pendulum swings back and the economy, perhaps interest rates go up and there's inflation back in, that people will pull back from this focus on inclusion. And if you can remember that inclusion is all about getting the best talent. And if you can do that, you'll never stop creating inclusive environments.
We really appreciate your words of wisdom. Thank you again for joining us. Your award is well deserved.
Thank you so much.